Before the sun rose on June 6, 1944, the world was already awake, holding its breath in the darkness. The English Channel lay cold and restless, a wide black barrier between hope and despair. Across that water waited Nazi-occupied Europe, silent, fortified, and confident that no force on earth could break through its defenses. For nearly 4 years, freedom had been pushed back, city by city, nation by nation. Families were divided, voices were silenced, and entire countries lived under the shadow of fear. And now, in the final hours before dawn, everything depended on what would happen next. Out on the sea, thousands of ships moved without lights, cutting through the waves like shadows. Battleships, destroyers, transports, and landing craft formed a moving city of steel, stretching farther than the eye could see. Above them, aircraft engines hummed steadily in the night sky, carrying young men who had written goodbye letters they prayed would never be opened. Some of those letters spoke of love, some of fear, some of promises to come home. These were not soldiers chasing glory. They were ordinary Americans, farmers, students, factory workers, sons, brothers, husbands, moving toward a place many of them would never leave. This was not just an invasion. This was a gamble with history itself. This was D-Day. By 1944, Nazi Germany controlled most of Western Europe. France had fallen years earlier, its beaches transformed into fortified killing zones, its towns living under occupation. German flags flew where local banners once stood. Allied bombers struck relentlessly, day and night, shaking cities and factories, but air power alone could not win the war. Bombs could weaken Germany, but they could not liberate Europe. To defeat Hitler, the Allies had to return to the continent by land, face the enemy directly, and force their way inland, mile by mile, village by village. The plan was called Operation Overlord. Its objective was simple and terrifying: land a massive Allied force in northern France, break through Hitler's Atlantic Wall, and open a second front that Germany could not survive. Normandy was chosen, a coastline protected by concrete bunkers, artillery guns, minefields, steel obstacles, and experienced German troops trained to repel invasion. Hitler believed the main Allied attack would strike farther east, at Calais, the narrowest point of the Channel. That belief became the Allies' greatest weapon. Across England, an enormous deception campaign unfolded in silence. Fake armies were created from nothing. Inflatable tanks stood in open fields, convincing enemy spies they were real. Wooden aircraft lined fake airstrips. False radio signals flooded the air, carefully crafted to sound authentic. German intelligence listened closely, watched carefully, and reached the wrong conclusion. While the enemy waited at Calais, convinced the invasion had not yet begun, the real invasion force gathered quietly elsewhere, preparing for a single, irreversible moment. At the center of it all stood General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. He understood the cost of failure better than anyone. Tens of thousands of lives lost in hours. A shattered alliance. A war that could drag on for years more, perhaps even be lost. On the night of June 5th, violent storms battered the English Channel. Rain slashed across airfields. Waves rose high, threatening to tear landing craft apart. Many senior commanders urged delay. The conditions were dangerous. The risks were enormous. Eisenhower listened. He studied the weather reports again and again. He walked alone, weighed every consequence, and finally paused. Then he made the hardest decision of his life. The invasion would go forward. History would move at dawn. Just after midnight, the first American soldiers entered enemy territory, not by sea, but by sky. Paratroopers boarded aircraft, their faces painted, their equipment heavy, their nerves tight. As the planes crossed the French coastline, anti-aircraft fire ripped through the clouds, lighting the night with sudden flashes. Green lights blinked on. Doors opened, and then they jumped. Many paratroopers landed far from their targets. Strong winds scattered them across fields, forests, and flooded farmland. Some fell into dark water and drowned under the weight of their gear. Others landed directly among German patrols. Isolated and scattered, small groups began fighting immediately, destroying bridges, cutting communication lines, ambushing enemy units, and spreading confusion deep behind German defenses. They did not know where their comrades were. They did not know if the invasion had even begun. Their mission was brutally simple. Hold the ground. Delay the enemy. Survive until dawn. As the long night slowly faded, the sea came alive. The invasion fleet moved closer to the French coast, wave after wave of landing craft riding rough water. Inside them, soldiers sat in silence, gripping their rifles, their knuckles white. Some whispered prayers. Others stared straight ahead, their minds empty, forcing themselves not to think. Many had never seen combat. All of them knew that once the ramps dropped, there would be no retreat. The coastline of Normandy grew clearer through the early morning mist. Dark shapes of obstacles appeared in the water. The sound of engines mixed with distant explosions. Then, without warning, German guns opened fire. When the ramps fell, chaos erupted. At Omaha Beach, American forces faced the most lethal defenses in all of Normandy. German machine guns and artillery were positioned high on steep bluffs, firing down with deadly precision. Landing craft were torn apart before reaching shore. Soldiers were hit in the water, on the ramps, on the sand. Bodies fell everywhere. The beach became a storm of smoke, fire, shattered equipment, and fear. Entire units were wiped out in minutes. Men tried to run forward and were cut down. Others dropped to the sand, pinned by gunfire they could not escape. Medics crawled through bullets to reach the wounded. Officers fell, leaving small groups leaderless, forced to make decisions on instinct alone. For a moment that felt endless, it seemed impossible that anyone could survive such fire, let alone advance. Yet even in that chaos, courage refused to break. Small groups began to move, inch by inch. Soldiers crawled through surf and sand, using shell holes and obstacles for cover. Others climbed the cliffs under constant fire, pulling themselves upward with ropes, roots, and bare hands. One bunker at a time, they attacked from unexpected angles. Progress was slow, brutal, and paid for dearly, but it continued. To the west, at Utah Beach, American troops landed off course but encountered lighter resistance. Instead of pulling back, commanders pushed forward, moving inland faster than planned and linking up with airborne units who had survived the night. To the east, British and Canadian forces stormed Gold, Juno, and Sword Beaches, battling through fortified positions, clearing villages, and driving toward their objectives. Across the entire front, the invasion held. Above the beaches, Allied aircraft thundered overhead, striking roads, bridges, and enemy reinforcements racing toward Normandy. From the sea, naval guns fired without pause, pounding German positions along the coast. Slowly, painfully, the Atlantic wall began to crack. By nightfall, the Allies had secured a fragile but undeniable foothold on French soil. And the war had entered its final chapter. As darkness returned to Normandy on the night of June 6, 1944, the sound of battle slowly changed. The constant thunder of guns softened into distant echoes. Fires burned along the beaches, casting an orange glow over wrecked landing craft and abandoned equipment. For the men who had survived the first day, exhaustion set in. Many had not slept for more than 24 hours. Some had not eaten. Yet none believed the danger was over. They knew the Germans would strike back. Along the thin Allied lines, soldiers dug shallow positions in unfamiliar soil, listening to every sound, gripping their weapons, waiting. Paratroopers who had landed scattered across the countryside finally began to regroup, emerging from hedgerows and fields, tired, wounded, but still standing. Against all odds, they had delayed German reinforcements long enough for the beaches to be held. What had seemed impossible just hours earlier was now real. The Allies were in France. German commanders were stunned. Reports from Normandy were confusing and incomplete. Hitler himself remained convinced that the Normandy landings were only a diversion and that the real invasion would still come at Calais. Because of that belief, powerful German armored divisions were held back, waiting for an attack that never came. Time, the most valuable resource in war, slipped away from Germany hour by hour. With each passing day, Allied strength in Normandy grew. More ships arrived. More soldiers stepped onto French soil. Tanks rolled off landing craft. Artillery was positioned. Temporary harbors were assembled piece by piece in the open sea, allowing supplies to flow directly onto the beaches. What began as a fragile foothold slowly transformed into a powerful invasion force. The fighting inland was brutal. Normandy was not open countryside. It was a maze of narrow roads, thick hedgerows, stone farmhouses, and hidden defensive positions. German troops fought stubbornly, using the terrain to their advantage. Every village became a battle. Every field had to be cleared. Progress was measured not in miles, but in yards. Casualties continued to mount on both sides. For civilians living in occupied France, liberation came at a terrible cost. Towns were shelled. Homes were destroyed. Families fled or hid as armies clashed around them. Yet, even in the chaos, many French citizens emerged to guide Allied troops, share information, and offer what little help they could. After years of silence and fear, hope returned, fragile but alive. As weeks passed, Allied pressure increased from every direction. American forces pushed west toward the port of Cherbourg, knowing that securing a deep-water harbor was essential for sustaining the invasion. British and Canadian troops fought fierce battles in the east, drawing German armor away from American advances. Slowly, the German front began to bend, then crack. By late summer, the Allies broke out of Normandy. Fast-moving armored units surged forward across France, cutting off retreating German forces and liberating city after city. Paris rose in rebellion, and within days, the city was free. Crowds filled the streets, celebrating soldiers who only weeks earlier had fought for survival on distant beaches. But D-Day was more than the start of a military campaign. It was a turning point in human history. Before June 6, 1944, the future of Europe was uncertain. Tyranny seemed unstoppable. After that day, the balance shifted. Nazi Germany was forced onto the defensive, fighting a war it could no longer win. Less than a year after the landings in Normandy, Allied armies closed in on Germany from east and west. The Third Reich collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. Hitler retreated into his bunker, isolated and defeated. In May 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. World War II in Europe was over. Yet the true meaning of D-Day cannot be measured only by victories or defeats. It lies in the individuals who faced unimaginable fear and moved forward anyway. Teenagers who lied about their age to enlist. Medics who ran toward gunfire. Pilots who flew again and again, knowing each mission could be their last. Ordinary people placed in extraordinary circumstances who chose courage over fear. Today, the beaches of Normandy are peaceful. The cliffs still rise above the sand. The waves still roll in from the channel, just as they did that morning long ago. White crosses and quiet memorials stand where chaos once ruled. Visitors walk the shore, often in silence, sensing that they are standing on ground where history changed direction. D-Day reminds us that freedom is never free. It is earned by sacrifice, preserved by memory, and protected by those willing to stand when it matters most. On that day, when the world seemed darkest, a generation stepped forward and refused to turn back. Because they did, the future was reclaimed. Because they did, the world was changed forever.